Look, the purpose of college is not just, as I said before, to transmit skills. It's also to widen your horizons, to make you a better citizen, to help you to evaluate information, to help you make your way through the world, to help you be more creative. The way to do that is to create a space where a lot of ideas are presented and collide, and people are having arguments, and people are testing each other's theories, and over time, people learn from each other because they're getting out of their own narrow point of view and having a broader point of view.
What kind of person wants to get a job policing microaggressions? Asked Catherine Timp of the National Review. Gosh, you had me there, Catherine. Just what kind of people would want to be traitorous to their peers? She writes, the University of Arizona is hiring students to be social justice activists, and the job description demands that they report any bias, incidents, or claims to appropriate residence life staff. Well, if you're considering doing community service, then why not volunteer in this righteous cause? I mean, it's not like someone could profit from being a self-styled rat, right? In other words, these kids are being paid to tattle on other kids for anything they might consider to be a microaggression. I see, so it's snitch on your friends and family for fun and cash. According to the university's website, the official title of the position is Social Justice Activist. A big surprise there, right? And it pays $10 an hour. They can expect to work about 15 hours per week, which means that they will be making roughly $600 per month to behave like self-righteous, meddling nightmares. Sell out your fellow students for profit and advancement in your social justice career of choice. In addition to reporting the potentially offensive behavior of their peers, other parts of the job include planning social justice programs for the residence halls, increasing awareness and knowledge of diverse identities and how they influence interactions, and promoting inclusive communities through positive interaction. And I do agree with Catherine about her next thought. And all that is fine. I'm all for being a nice, sensitive person, but encouraging outside sources to report bias incidents whenever they feel that other students have been wronged is a terrible idea. It's one thing to give students a place to report any problems that they've experienced themselves, but shouldn't it be up to the person who was involved to decide whether or not there even was a problem in the first place? And chances are that there will be reports of incidents committed against victims who never even felt that they were victims to begin with. This is a harsh sentiment about the state of affairs on college campuses. I, for one, am glad that this is not part of my daily life. At university, that is. There are SJWs outside of academia and no less insidious. It's a very likely scenario, especially when you think about what kind of person would apply for a job as social justice advocate. No doubt the people who are hired will be the kind of buzzword salad-spewing sycophants who do think that you guys is problematic, or else they wouldn't be interested in having that sort of job in the first place. No one would want a job policing microaggressions unless he or she is the type of person who loves policing microaggressions. And we all know that those sorts of people are growing more and more ridiculous by the day. Students should feel comfortable at school, absolutely, but it's also important to remember that these students are adults, which means that we should trust them to decide how to handle their own social problem the way that they themselves see fit. We have an unending supply of examples of SJWs on and off campus wanting to send us back to the dark ages. Much like their far-right religious counterparts, they spew ideology and dogma. Free speech is no longer to be treasured, but a thing to fear and revile against.
No, I don't agree with that.
Then why the fuck did you accept the position?
Because
Who the fuck hired you?
I have a different
You
vision
should
than you.
step down. If that is what you think about being ambassador, you should step down. It is not about creating an intellectual space. It is not. Do you understand that? It's about creating a home here. You are not doing that.
You're supposed to be our advocate.
Refuting bad ideas with good ideas is important, but so is removing bad ideas from the discourse.
And my job is to shut other white people down when they want to interrupt.
So you know what we need to do? We need to start giving fucking money. White people, give your fucking money, your fucking house, your fucking property. We need it fucking all. You need to reparate Black and Indigenous people right now. Pay the fuck up. Pay the fuck up. It ain't just your fucking time, it's your fucking money, and your fucking life is now devoted to social change, right?
All white people are racist, all men are misogynistic, all cisgender people are transphobic, all members of a majority are biased against the members of the minority or oppressed group. In fact, most people are racist, misogynistic, transphobic, ableist, etc.
You are surrounded by your privilege, right? Take your privilege somewhere else, please. All right? Because your privilege is not welcome here. So unless you are here to dismantle your privilege, please find somewhere else to go.
These modern-day SJW Grand Inquisitor Torquemada want to roll back the advances of the Enlightenment in defense of ideas that do not require such radical tactics. Now that we talk of the Enlightenment, I read to you parts of an enlightened review by Lorna Salzman that has much relevance to this topic. I am quoting a small part of the work that encompasses an outlook to include the broader problem of radical Islam. But please do read the entire article linked in the description below. The Enlightenment of the 18th century, whose principles enabled the rise of secular democracy, egalitarianism, and human rights, was made flesh in the French Revolution and inscribed in our Constitution as the foundation of our country's statutes and political identity. It also made possible the scientific revolution that began in the previous century, even as it provoked persecution of scientific freethinkers by the Catholic Church, whose doctrines and power structures were directly threatened. Dissent and free inquiry were arguably the best gifts of the Enlightenment. In the U.S., the social justice warrior feminists have their own vigilantism via Twitter and the internet, lynching nonconformist thinkers like Richard Dawkins.
I was on the faculty in Berkeley in the late 1960s, which was shortly after the free speech movement. So Berkeley was the home of the free speech movement on campuses. Berkeley now is betraying the free speech movement by denying a voice to people because they are likely to give offense to people on campus. The moment somebody like Ayon Hirsi Ali is invited to give a speech, the Islamic Society in the university, this happened in Brandeis, for example, will complain, and immediately their complaint is upheld and she gets disinvited. This pathetic eagerness not to offend anybody, particularly not to offend Muslims, but not to offend anybody, and thus you get these ridiculous so-called safe spaces. Play-Doh. Puppies and kittens to play with in case what on earth is a university for, other than to be challenged, other than to be invited to think for yourself?
Let us look at the new social resistance movements in the U.S., collectively called the social justice warriors, exemplified by radical feminist attacks on white men and atheists, campus identity politics demanding safe spaces, rejection of textbooks written by white men, demands for protection from what they interpret as racist speech, political correctness, inculcation of white university teachers with a better attitude and more awareness of racism, demands for trigger warnings of writings or speech that might make them uncomfortable, a reversion to the ugly notion of group as opposed to individual equality, calls for physical segregation. This is secular doctrinal coercion intended to remove white privilege and replace it with black privilege, or women's privilege, or gay privilege. To enhance this doctrine, those filing their complaints against an entire society are willing, even eager, to revive the segregation of the early 20th century, to submit whites to loyalty oath, to coerce coerce educational institutions into marginalizing or abandoning the intellectual creations of Western civilization on grounds that our ancestors owned slaves or held some repugnant positions on race. Only their being dead deprives these critics of the ability to punish them personally. Instead, all of American society must now pay penance by knuckling under to the new Stalinism. The feminists and the SJW, who represents a secular version of radical fundamentalist religion, and in which their personal doctrinal dedication precludes dissent and dialogue, in the end discarding egalitarianism in favor of phenotypic preference in a modern version of social Darwinism. At its core, SJW feminism and identity politics are all resistance movements against Enlightenment principles of reason, dissent, free thought, and scientific inquiry. And no one articulates these values more credibly than Richard Dawkins and his associate new atheists such as Sam Harriott, Daniel Dennett, Michael Shermer. Worse, these white men are powerful advocates of evolution. This is that touchy subject inflicted on everyone in school, taught by professors enthralled to capitalism and corporate power, who do not sufficiently preach or abjectly accede to the goals of the SJW and the feminists, who do not preach cultural relativism, who do not indict our distant ancestors for today's plague of sexism, who do not adequately incorporate the feminist left's own social justice principles into their daily lessons, and who do not play the game called phenotype rules, in which skin color or ethnicity displaces equal rights for individuals. Evolution's enabler, natural selection, is condemned as the progenitor of inequality and genetic determinism. Behavior or practices with an evolutionary basis are scorned as repulsive, replaced by the Marxist doctrine, now rampant among cultural determinists and postmodernists, that society alone is to blame for human misbehavior. A modern version of original sin, and that therefore society must be engineered, by the left of course, to attain a just and equitable society. Social justice and feminist warriors seem to have missed the totalitarian implications of this doctrine, not to mention that others than themselves might end up doing the social engineering in the name of a different doctrine.
And the left is more disturbing in some ways because the left is supposed to be concerned about human values, compassion, interdependence of, but unfortunately we've had in the universities, and this goes back to the 60s actually, and with a lot of foreign influences, we have the trend called postmodernism, which you've probably heard of. I don't mean the postmodern McMansions in the Hamptons, that's but something just as bad, actually. And postmodernism is famous because it says that everything is socially constructed, including truth, including science, particularly science. So there's been a reaction against science, not only from, say, the Tea Party and the fundamentalist Christians and the Muslims and so forth. There's come a backlash from the left. These people, the postmodernists, are very staunchly left and socialist. And
like the old Stalin who spit in the face of science, we are witnessing the dismissal not only of reason, but of the notion of universal values and the replacement of the individual as the inheritor of rights with the concept of group rights. This is an old trick, and more than just diversionary. It is subversive of all the Enlightenment principles embodied in our Constitution and in our entire civil society. It is socially divisive, and we can see every day from the tussles on campuses and on the internet. And if group rights ever become the norm, then it's a coin toss as to who decides which group gets the rights and which ones don't, or which group gets pilloried for its offenses.
And so for them they put their stake in the notion, we've heard about the politics is political, the personal is political. You've heard about identity politics, where identity meaning, whatever you happen to think is right, and whatever you think is wrong because, and you know what you're talking about because you happen to be a Native American or an African American or whatever. So that's what's come out of postmodernism, a tremendous skepticism of science as a discipline, science as a profession, science as knowledge. That's all it is science as knowledge. Sure. But they've put a big dent in this. And of course, a very, very big dent. And it's really bad because if you add it on to people who are already into irrationalism. I mean, we have a major resurgence of irrationalism. You know, we've had it a lot in 40 years, but it's really becoming conspiracy theories and beliefs in you know, in all kinds of cults and mythologies and New Age stuff and so forth. So then all of a sudden, when you see academics, postmodern academics of the left, or you know, who are secular, they're not religious, and you see them casting aspersions on evolution, natural selection, Darwin, people like Richard Dawkins and so forth, it only makes it worse. It only adds on to the suspicion of science. Wow. And so this is the situation that we have in this country. It's not limited to this country, but it's mostly this country.
In a word, the new social justice, feminism, attack dogs are dancing to the same ideological tune as the Islamists and the fundamentalist Muslims. But instead of regarding women as the fount of everything repugnant, they are indicting white atheist men, not the old boys club of the U.S. Congress, not the male boardrooms of corporations, not the pederast priests, not the unpunished rapists in the U.S. military, not the Wall Street financiers and brokers who created the expanding economic inequality that has thrown millions out of jobs, not the corporations who outsource or move their businesses abroad to avoid taxes and thus indirectly impoverish social, technological, and infrastructure funding. To address these would be too much like work, intellectual work, physical work, time, money, organization. Far easier it is to limit yourself to what is nearby and easy to torment, the campus. And famous white men, it is far easier to curse atheists on Twitter or the internet or confront an individual without worrying about evidence, without having to leave your computer and go out into the streets and do some actual political work. Far easier it is to insinuate and intimidate instead of debate. Far easier it is to manipulate, even create, stimulants of human guilt. The irony of all this, amid the spectacle of a degraded and despised public space and discourse, is that today's overtly atheist movement was stimulated by a profound concern over a growing global human rights crisis caused mostly by religion, the persecution and murder of women, gays, and apostates by a theocratic pseudo-nation state calling itself Islam, a state founded on the rejection of reason and the embrace of irrationality and doctrinal fanaticism. The SJW movement appropriated the lesson brilliantly and adapted it to the secular context, ending up precisely alongside those such as climate change deniers who promised to destroy every remnant of the Enlightenment. This is what is commonly known as giving aid and comfort to the enemy, but in this case the enemy is a friend. Once again, I have selected words from Lorna Salzman's writing to fit the narrow confines of this video, and once again I implore you to read the article in its entirety, because what she is saying is a damning indictment of the SJW's purposeful collusion in defense of a dangerous religion to suit their goals. Lorna has written a book that is on my list to read in the near future titled Politics as If Evolution Mattered, Darwin, Ecology, and Social Justice. From her previous writings, I would bet it's a great read. Lorna Salzman's warning about social justice is not to be taken lightly. The University of Arizona's New Thought Police might be the spearhead in this war against enlightenment. What do we do? What should we do? First is to get active and do your part in keeping the spirit of freedom alive. For hundreds of years, we have struggled against dark forces to attain a level equality that has never been seen before in history. If we cherish our freedoms, we must do the hard work of speaking out against taking us back to the Dark Ages.
Friends of mine and colleagues who've been criticizing everything I say. No wonder. I don't speak perfectly, and my arguments aren't perfectly formulated. Neither are anyone else's. And we have to be able to say what we have to say badly, or we won't be able to think at all. And I know where that leads. I studied totalitarianism for 4 decades, and I know how it starts.
The history of Western Enlightenment has been one of positive progress with periods of regression, and this is where we are now, in one of those times where ideologues want to drag us back. Their motives may be well-intentioned, but their tactics are absurd. Thank you once again for tuning in to Radio Enlightenment. Please help us grow by hitting the like or subscribing. Goodbye.